Hey guys, welcome everybody to the Crypto Times inaugural live stream. I am your host, the Crypto Baron, and today we are absolutely privileged to be joined by none other than the Charles Hoskinson, the Chief Executive Officer at Input Output Hong Kong.
It's a pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me. So the first time I'd heard about Bitcoin at all was quite early on. I think it was 2010 or 2011. And somebody had sent me via an email a copy of the white paper. And so I looked at it, I read it. I said, that's kind of a really interesting thing. And I said, wow, they got Merkle trees and this proof of work thing seems to be a really interesting consensus protocol. And from a technological standpoint, it seemed like a pretty novel idea, but I was very skeptical about the economics and very skeptical about them ever being able to get a kind of a scale. So I put it on the back burner. I ended up actually getting a lot of Bitcoins. At one point, I think I may have had 50 or 60,000 of them, but they weren't worth a lot back then. So I gave them all away, and it was probably less than $1,000 of value or something. Can't remember the exact amount, but anyway, it was just a small fun thing. Then around 2013, I started having some more free time, and I remember the Cyprus incident, and Bitcoin went way up, like $200 a coin, and I said, wow, it looks like they've achieved some network effect. And I started very carefully thinking about it. And I said, this is a really interesting space. And so I probably should do something in it. So I remember what an old professor of mine used to say. He said, those who cannot do, teach. So the first thing that I did in the space is I founded the Bitcoin Education Project. And basically what I did is I tried to get all of the people together who were involved in Bitcoin education and create some free content and just put it up on the YouTube and put it up on Udemy and other sources and release it under a Creative Commons license. And the idea was to kind of establish some basic MOOC, a massive open online course that could kind of explain what is Bitcoin, why is it special, and what are the broader implications that this technology is going to have. So I created a class, and I'm a big Peter Sellers fan, so I called the class Bitcoin or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Crypto. And I ended up getting about 50,000 students, which was just unbelievable. So then they sent me emails, because that's what students do, and I got about 5,000 emails, and I answered every single one of them, which, as you can imagine, was a tremendously time-consuming endeavor. At that point, somebody from China approached me and said, hey, I love what you're doing. I'd love to fund you. I have some money. I was a Bitcoin early adopter, and now we're all doing quite well. Kind of wish I hung on to my Bitcoin, because I would be doing quite well, too. He said, I'll give you some money to start a Bitcoin venture. And I said, well, that sounds like a grand idea, but I have no idea what to do. And he said, oh, you'll figure it out. You're a bright guy. I said, okay. So I asked my students, I said, what do you think would be the most impactful thing to invest some time and effort in to build a company around? So I got a lot of replies back, but I did get a bimodal distribution. So one group of people said decentralized exchange is really important, because it doesn't matter how decentralized the currency is if the aggregation points where you transaction between fiat and the crypto or digital to digital are regulated exchanges, and basically governments can levy control over those entities. For example, if they don't like Zcash, they can say you can't list Zcash, or they don't like Singular DTV because maybe it's a security in their mind, and they'll just say you need a broker-dealer license to trade it, and they'll say, so Poloniex will drop it, and so forth. So one group of students said, hey, let's do decentralized exchange. And the other group of students said, this is all great and all, but we're never going to replace traditional fiat currencies if we don't have value stability. So what is value stability? It's where you have something where the price today for goods and services is probably about the same as the price tomorrow, which is not the case for something like Bitcoin, because the value goes way up and way down. Like when I came in at 2013, it went up to 248. And then at that point, I think we were down to 80 or 100. So it's like, in under a year, you lose more than 50% of your value. That's not sustainable for things like credit. How can you give a loan when both the lender and the lendee have no idea what the underlying asset's going to be worth? Like, just as a quick example, if I said, Crypto Baron, I'll give you 10 Bitcoin, and this was December 30th, 2012, and you have to pay me back 11, December 30th, 2013, under an ordinary stable currency, that'd be a great deal. And by the way, Bitcoin back then, I think, was $10 or something along those lines. So there was $100 of value at risk. And all of a sudden, you have to pay me back in Bitcoin around December 30th of 2013, I think was around over $1,000 a coin. So you have to pay me back $11,000. Let's say we made the same deal 1 year later, I would actually win that bet, because Bitcoin went down considerably that year. So the other group of students said, hey, let's do a value stable currency. And I said, okay, it would be really cool if we could roll these two things up. And I felt that like if we could do these two things together, it would make the cryptocurrency movement very resilient and invincible. And so I remembered a Helmsley poem, Invictus. And so I said, Project Invictus. And I launched a Bitcoin talk thread. And the very first person to post on it was Bytemaster, which is, people know, that's Dan Larimer. And he had this idea of Bitshares percolating in the back of his head. And so we kind of partnered together, and the Chinese put money into a company we set up in Virginia, down in Virginia Tech at the Corporate Research Center. And I got Bitshares up to a point where it was ready to launch. And Dan and I kept fighting and fighting because we both have very strong opinions on things. And at some point, I just took a buyout and left and went on to go do Ethereum with Vitalik. And then Dan went on to build out the Bitshares ecosystem and brought in delegated proof of stake and the graphene platform, and later did Steam, and now I guess he's doing EOS. So he's been very successful in propagating these ideas. We didn't quite solve the value stable currency, but we did get the conversation started. And there was a lot of ventures that have come afterwards, like MakerDAO and Tether. And there's a lot of thought that's going into that. And in terms of decentralized exchange, there's certainly a lot of thought that's going into that as well. And I think we made a lot of positive contributions there. But what most people know me for these days is Ethereum. So let's talk about that. Ethereum was really the accidental project. It wasn't intended to be this 800-pound gorilla that was going to go take over the world. Rather, what happened was that after I left Bitshares, I was kind of looking for something to do. And Anthony DiOrio had contacted me to do some educational content for the Bitcoin Alliance of Canada. Because at the time he was the director, and he knew me from the Bitcoin Education Project. And Anthony's like, hey, let's do something together. And so we started working, and he was a great guy, kind of sharp elbows, but that's his style, and that's how he gets things done. And he's very good at getting things done, especially if you look at how fast Jax has grown. And he said, hey, by the way, there's this brilliant kid that shows up to the Toronto Bitcoin meetups we have at Decentral, named Vitalik, and he's got this crazy white paper. I can't make heads or tails of it. Can you read it and let me know what you think? I said, sure. So I looked at the paper, and it was basically like a virtual machine taped on as an overlay protocol on top of Primecoin. It wasn't even a standalone cryptocurrency. And basically the idea was to add smart contracts to a cryptocurrency. Now, the reason why Vitalik wanted to do this wasn't because he had this grand scheme of building a decentralized world. It was more a project of frustration for him because he was a core developer for Color Coins as well as Mastercoin. And he was getting into all this trouble trying to make the damn things work. And every little feature or functionality was just this enormous effort. And he's like, why can't programming for blockchains be like programming for the web, where you have JavaScript with the browser and you have some degree of programmability? So Vitalik wanted to attach a programming language to a blockchain and give people a much easier time building things like Namecoin or Color Coins and so forth. So it's a really novel idea, but the problem was that we didn't really know how to execute it. So I said, this is a really interesting paper. I think we can do something with it, but we need to kind of start building a team. And Anthony said, well, we already have kind of a team. There was 4 other people at the time. There was Mihai Alicia, Vitalik, Amir Shetreat, and Anthony. And I was number 5 in that group. And at the same time,
sorry to interrupt before Gavin and Jeff even.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. So what happened at the same time, Vitalik had set up a Skype group, and a bunch of people started joining the Skype group. So I don't know exactly when Gav of York, that's Gavin's name, his Skype handle, joined, but I think it was around November or December of 2013. So I think we probably joined right around the same time, but he wasn't in any of the initial meetings. Instead, what he was doing was just kind of figuring out how the heck would you implement this. Now, meanwhile, Jeff had a Skype handle called Obscurin, and Jeff was actually anonymous. We didn't know who he was because he was actually a core developer of Mastercoin at the time. So I guess he was kind of hedging his bets, and he was having a lot of fun building like a Go version of it. Well, anyway, after we started growing, because every week we would grow by like 100 people in the Skype room, and it became very clear that this was something special. And Vitalik released a new version of the white paper where this was a standalone cryptocurrency, still very kludgy. It was like proof of work with a cork coin style distribution where most of the currency would be mined in 3 years. It wasn't very perfect from that sense, but it was much, much better, and it actually looked like it could work. So at that point, Anthony said, you know what? We got to make some decisions here. So let's all get together. So Anthony went ahead and rented a beach house in Miami. And this was in January of 2014. And he said, all right, let's just have all the people who are going to come, and let's all meet each other, see if we're assholes or if we like each other, and see what we can do together and kind of figure out what this project is going to be all about. And at the same time, we'll go and present Ethereum at the North American Bitcoin Conference that was being held at Miami at the same time, and see what the community reception was. So we all just kind of bought our tickets and flew in there. And this was the first time that I met Gavin in person. Jeff didn't come. Mihai wanted to come, but he couldn't get a visa because he's Romanian, and it's sometimes hard to get visas on short notice. But we did pipe them in a few times, and Vitalik and Mihai know each other really well because they did Bitcoin Magazine together. And the rest of us went there. I think there's probably about 20 or 30 people who ended up going to that beach house. So we all got to know each other. We all hit it off. It was really fun. I really enjoyed the conversations. Some were philosophical, some were business-oriented, some were technological. And then the moment of truth was when we went to the North American Bitcoin Conference, and we did two presentations. One presentation was done by Vitalik, and the other was a debate, which is still actually up on YouTube. The debate I did with David Johnston and Dan Larimer. So anyway, Vitalik's presentation was incredibly well received, and my debate was well received. And it became very clear that we had something tremendously special, that the community really wanted this, that the idea of having a programming language on a blockchain and being able to create smart contracts, and to a greater extent this whole DAO philosophy that we first started talking about at Invictus, we called it a DAC. Stan Larimer actually wrote one of the first papers, and very shortly after, Vitalik wrote some papers on DAOs in Bitcoin Magazine. But the idea had been floating around since Mike Hearn presented it at the Turing Festival, I think in 2011 or 12. So, you know, this whole notion of an autonomous company running in the web, which has no jurisdiction but can have legally enforceable contracts, was like super cool. And the community was just like on fire for this type of stuff. Also, you have to understand the environment that we were in. Bitcoin went from $100 to over $1,200 in like a month. And everything was just crazy. Like, hype was at maximum level. Dogecoin just came out and everybody was making money on it. Next had just come out and everybody was making money on it. So it was a very hot environment, and Ethereum kind of looked like the sexiest, most promising of all projects. So we agreed to kind of develop a forked strategy. So we would break ourselves apart into kind of 3 different groups, and each group would handle a particular dimension of the project. One group would worry about getting the project funded long term. One group would worry about the underlying technology and getting it to a state of maturity where it was reasonable to fund the project. And one group would kind of be like marketing and community advertising and business development, go talk to everybody and see what kind of strategic partnerships we could do. So I felt that the single most important component was the legal structure and the ability to get the company to the project to a fundable state. So I took that plank. Gavin and Vitalik took the development side, and then Anthony and others kind of took the biz dev and marketing, along with Joe, and they just went around at a conference after conference and did interview after interview and kind of built up the hype and got people excited and brought in a great community. About a month later, we also hired Stefan Tuol because he was running a website that was very pro Ethereum, and we thought he would be a good guy. Go figure. And he came in and took over community management as well. And we had a very aggressive meetup group strategy that he helped execute. So I moved to Switzerland, and we ended up setting up a GmbH there. And we worked really hard. We got tax rulings, and we talked to lawyers very extensively. We also had a parallel legal effort in the United States where we talked to a US law firm about writing a more likely than not opinion about exactly what would the ether sale constitute in terms of required regulation and so forth. So I spent months of my life working on that, and it was very tedious technical work and a lot of hard meetings that were long. Like in Switzerland, some of them lasted 12 hours. You're just one after another after another. Gavin, in the meantime, formalized the EVM. He produced the yellow paper, and it was ready by the Toronto conference in April of 2014. And Anthony and Joe and Amir and others, they really killed it. They went to Silicon Valley. They went to the Paul Snow's conference down in Texas and talked to a lot of people, and they got a lot of people very excited about Ethereum. So at the at the end of all of that, we converged upon Anthony's conference in Toronto, and then we had to start making some decisions about what the future of Ethereum was going to be, because we had gotten to a point where the hype was there, the technology was there, and we had divergent options on the business side. So there's kind of, how do we want to run it and how do we want to fund it? So how do we want to fund it? We had two options. One was to take VC money, and at that point there was certainly a good market for it. Blockstream at the same time was raising capital, and I believe they got a $26 million investment. And so Silicon Valley was totally prepared to put equivalent amounts of money into a for-profit company if it looked like it had something very competitive. And frankly, it would have been one of the best investments of all time in Silicon Valley had that been done. So we knew the VC money was there, and we also knew that we could do a crowd sale. And the only question was, how would that be done? What entity would it be executed? And so forth. So we started those conversations in Toronto very heavily. And my opinion was that the project had grown too large. We had people in 5 different countries working for Ethereum. A lot of people had brought in their friends. We didn't have clear contracts or command and control. It was a very flat structure. Even though I was voted the CEO by the founders, because there was 8 founders at that point, it's like, well, what exactly does that mean? I didn't have an official employment contract or any mandate of what I'm supposed to do, or so forth. I was just trying to be useful. So I said, what we probably need to do is start a for-profit company, take a VC investment, centralize in Switzerland, and turtle up and build the protocol over a 6 months to a year cycle. Because Bitcoin's kind of in a downtrend, and it'd be better to launch it at the bottom of the market instead of right at the top. B, because the legal risk would be tremendously lower. C, because everybody would have to go through due diligence then. I think we had probably over 200 people floating around the Ethereum spectrum, and we didn't know basically these people's backgrounds, if they were going to go and do their own things, what the liabilities were, what they'd been promised. It just grew so organically and so rapidly. The other option was to just set up a foundation and have that foundation conduct a crowd sale and then use it to fund a collection of companies to build up the ecosystem. And let anybody who wants to participate and have a horizontal power structure, except for the fiduciaries of the foundation. So these were, viable options. Both of them could do things. My concern with the foundation approach was that if we went down that road, we'd have brain death, because there was no equity and nothing chaining people or vesting to this foundation outside of the appreciation of, let's say, the value of Ether, which they'll get regardless. There's no reason for them to stay. So they're all going to scatter and start their own companies, and we would lose a lot of value then. So, it's the debate is, do you start the EF and then consensus, or do you start consensus and then the EF? And this was kind of the quintessential debate. Well, anyway, we fought and fought and fought. And then June of 2014, we converged upon Switzerland to make the final decision. And in a boardroom brawl, my side lost, and I left, and Amir Shatrit left, and the devs won. And it became a foundation. And they went ahead a month later and did the crowd sale. And then immediately sent some of the money over to a new company in Germany, I think, or London. I can't remember where they incorporated. I believe it was called ETHDev. And Gavin and Jeff and Vitalik kind of ruled the roost and built Ethereum and launched it. And then most of the founders eventually left and started their own companies. So that was the extent of my involvement in Ethereum. Some of it was just helping corral people together. Some of it was philosophical advice and strategic advice. And some of it was a lot of hardcore business dev work, where we were trying really to keep everything together and make sure that which we had created that had value would not just scatter to the wind, and the project would not grow too quickly for its own good, or become too fragmented for its own good and gradually break apart. But anyway, that's what happened there.